What if I told you that the Chinese government isn't improvising its strategy for global dominance? That every move they make, from Belt and Road to technological competition to diplomatic maneuvering, comes from a playbook written over 2,000 years ago? Because while Western politicians scramble to understand Chinese behavior, treating each action as a puzzle to solve, Chinese leaders are simply executing strategies that have been refined across millennia. Strategies so effective they've kept Chinese civilization intact through the rise and fall of dozens of dynasties, through invasions, civil wars, and revolutions. The West reads Machiavelli and Clausewitz. China reads Sun Tzu, Han Feizi, and Guanzi. And those ancient texts? They're not historical curiosities gathering dust in museums. They're active instruction manuals sitting on the desks of Chinese Communist Party officials right now. Let's talk about the ancient secrets of Chinese statecraft that are shaping the 21st century. The art of war, winning without fighting. Everyone knows Sun Tzu's The Art of War. It's been translated into dozens of languages. Business executives quote it, military academies teach it, but most people completely misunderstand what it actually says. They think it's about strategy and tactics, how to win battles, how to outsmart opponents, military stuff. That's not what it's about at all. The central thesis of The Art of War is that the best victory is the one achieved without fighting. Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. That's not a tactical observation, that's a philosophical position about the nature of power and conflict. Sun Tzu argues that actual warfare is a sign of failure. If you have to fight, you've already made strategic mistakes. The skilled strategist shapes conditions so that opponents surrender or comply without the need for battle. You win before the war starts. Look at Chinese behavior in the South China Sea. They're not invading islands with military force, which would trigger war. They're building artificial islands slowly, inch by inch, creating facts on the ground gradually. Each individual action is too small to justify military response, but collectively, they're changing territorial realities without firing a shot. That's Sun Tzu. Win without fighting. Change the strategic situation so gradually that resistance becomes pointless by the time opponents realize what's happened. Look at Belt and Road. China isn't conquering countries militarily. They're binding them economically, building infrastructure, creating dependencies, establishing Chinese companies as indispensable to local economies. When a country owes you billions and depends on your technology to run their power grid, you don't need to invade them. They're already constrained. That's Sun Tzu. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Look at technology competition. China isn't trying to beat American tech companies in direct competition, which they'd lose. They're building parallel systems, alternative payment networks, alternative internet infrastructure, alternative financial platforms. When enough countries use Chinese systems, American technological dominance becomes irrelevant without any confrontation. That's Sun Tzu, and every Chinese official has read it. Many have it memorized. Legalism, the philosophy of power. Here's something most Westerners don't understand about Chinese political philosophy. Confucianism gets all the attention. Harmony, virtue, social order, the stuff that sounds nice. But the philosophy that actually runs the Chinese state, that's legalism. And legalism is brutal. Legalism emerged during the Warring States period around 300 BCE when China was fragmented into competing kingdoms. The question was simple: how do you build a state powerful enough to survive and conquer rivals? The legalist answer: harsh laws, severe punishments, and systematic surveillance. The state must be so powerful, so controlling, so pervasive that individual will is irrelevant. Citizens must be kept weak and divided while the state grows strong. Han Feizi, the great legalist philosopher, argued that human nature is fundamentally selfish. People don't act virtuously because it's right. They act according to incentives and punishments. So the ruler's job is to create a system of incentives and punishments so complete, so inescapable, that the state's will becomes automatic. Shang Yang, another legalist, advocated for collective responsibility. If one person in a household commits a crime, punish the whole household. If one person in a village resists the state, punish the whole village. Create a system where everyone watches everyone else, where social ties become tools of state control. Sound familiar? The Chinese social credit system is pure legalism. Monitor everything, record everything, reward compliance, punish deviation, not just the individual, but their family, their associates, their network. Make everyone responsible for everyone else's behavior. The household registration system that controls where Chinese citizens can live and work? Legalism. The Great Firewall controlling information? Legalism. The surveillance cameras with facial recognition watching every city street? Legalism. The Chinese Communist Party doesn't advertise this. They talk about Confucian harmony and socialist values, but the actual mechanisms of control come straight from legalist philosophy developed 2,300 years ago. And it works. Legalist Qin dynasty conquered all rivals and unified China in 221 BCE. The methods were so effective that every subsequent dynasty, despite claiming to reject legalism, used legalist techniques beneath Confucian rhetoric. The stratagems, deception as statecraft. Western political philosophy has an uneasy relationship with deception. There's lip service to honesty and transparency. Even Machiavelli, who's famous for advocating ruthless tactics, felt the need to justify deception as sometimes necessary evil. Chinese strategic thinking has no such ambivalence. Deception isn't a necessary evil. It's a fundamental tool of statecraft, fully integrated into classical strategic thinking. The 36 Stratagems is a collection of tactical deceptions compiled during the Ming Dynasty, but drawing on much older sources. These aren't just military tactics, they're approaches to any competitive situation, and Chinese officials study them systematically. Let me give you a few examples and show you how they're being used right now. Stratagem 3. Kill with a borrowed knife. Let someone else do your dirty work. Create conditions where a third party attacks your enemy for you. Look at Chinese behavior in trade disputes. China doesn't directly confront American tariffs with symmetric retaliation, which would escalate conflict. Instead, they target specific American products from politically sensitive states. Soybeans from Midwest farm states, bourbon from Kentucky. Make American domestic politics do the work of pressuring the U.S. government to back down. That's borrowed knife. Stratagem 6. Make noise in the East, attack in the West. Create distraction in one area while your real objective is somewhere else. When China makes aggressive moves in the South China Sea, they draw American attention and resources. While America is focused there, China accelerates Belt and Road in Africa and Latin America, locks down rare earth supply chains, advances technology in AI and quantum computing. The military posturing is the noise. The economic and technological positioning is the real attack. That's noise in the East. Stratagem 27. Feign madness, but keep your balance. Appear irrational or unpredictable to confuse opponents while maintaining clear strategic objectives internally. Chinese officials sometimes act in ways that seem self-defeating from a Western perspective. Aggressive wolf warrior diplomacy that damages China's international image, regulatory crackdowns on tech companies that destroy shareholder value, harsh COVID policies that hurt the economy. Western analysts interpret this as policy failure or political irrationality. But what if it's deliberate? What if the goal is to appear unpredictable, to make other countries uncertain about Chinese reactions, to create strategic confusion while maintaining internal clarity of purpose? That's feigned madness. Stratagem 33. Let the enemy's own spy sow discord. Use your enemy's intelligence gathering against them. China knows Western intelligence services monitor Chinese communications, so they feed information into channels they know are monitored. Create the impression of internal divisions. Suggest policy debates that don't exist. Make Western analysts waste time analyzing false signals. Meanwhile, truly sensitive communications happen through channels Western intelligence doesn't penetrate. The information the West gathers is real but misleading. They're reading intelligence that tells them what China wants them to believe. That's enemy's own spy. These aren't conspiracy theories. These are documented strategic approaches that Chinese military and political institutions teach. The stratagems are part of curriculum at Chinese military academies. Party officials study them, and more importantly, they use them. Unity through strength, the centralization principle. Chinese political philosophy going back 2,000 years has a consistent thread. Strong central authority is necessary for order and prosperity. Weak central authority leads to chaos, warlordism, and suffering. This isn't abstract theory. This is learned from brutal historical experience. Every time China fragmented into competing kingdoms, wars devastated the population. The Warring States period, the Three Kingdoms period, the warlord era of the early 20th century. Fragmentation meant war, famine, and collapse. Strong dynasties meant peace and prosperity. The Han Dynasty, the Tang Dynasty, the early Ming, even the Qing Dynasty during its peak. Centralized authority meant unified law, peaceful trade, infrastructure development, and protection from external threats. This historical experience shapes modern Chinese governance. The Communist Party's monopoly on power isn't seen as tyranny by most Chinese. It's seen as the necessary condition for stability and prosperity. It's about preventing what they see as the inevitable chaos that follows loss of central control. When Western leaders talk about democracy and pluralism, Chinese leaders hear fragmentation and chaos. When Westerners talk about civil society and independent institutions, Chinese officials hear competing power centers that will eventually tear the country apart. This isn't paranoia. This is classical Chinese statecraft. Strong center equals order. Weak center equals catastrophe. And 2,000 years of history provides ample evidence for that position. How this explains modern China. Everything we've discussed connects to modern Chinese behavior in ways that make it suddenly comprehensible. The Belt and Road Initiative, Sun Tzu's win without fighting, economic integration that achieves strategic objectives without military confrontation. The social credit system, legalist philosophy of control through comprehensive surveillance and collective responsibility. Wolf warrior diplomacy. The stratagems, create unpredictability. Make noise in the East while attacking in the West. Use borrowed knives. Obsession with GDP growth, mandate of heaven, legitimacy through performance, deliver prosperity or lose the right to rule, willingness to accept short-term costs, strategic patience, play the long game, the great bird flies slowly, narrative control and censorship, rectifying names, control the framework of discussion, shape how people understand reality, resistance to political reform, centralization principle, strong center equals order, fragmentation equals chaos. None of this is random, none of it is improvisation. It's the systematic application of strategic principles refined over millennia. Western analysts keep being surprised by Chinese behavior because they're analyzing it through Western frameworks. They're operating from Sun Tzu, Han Feizi, the 36 stratagems, and the entire corpus of classical Chinese strategic thinking. Once you understand that framework, Chinese behavior becomes predictable. Not because Chinese leaders are following a script, but because they're trained in a tradition that provides consistent answers to strategic questions. Why this matters for the rest of the world. Here's the crucial point. These ancient secrets of statecraft aren't just effective within Chinese civilization. They're effective generally. The principles work. Win without fighting is objectively better than costly wars. Strategic patience really does produce sustainable advantages. Narrative control actually does shape how people think. Comprehensive surveillance does enable social control. Deception as systematic strategy does confuse and manipulate opponents. The reason these approaches survive 2,000 years of Chinese history is that they work. And the reason they work in Chinese history is that they're based on deep insights about power, human nature, and strategic competition that are universal. This means the West is competing against not just Chinese capabilities, but Chinese strategic thinking that's been tested and refined across millennia. Every approach has been tried, evaluated, and either kept because it worked or discarded because it failed. What survived is a distilled essence of effective statecraft, and China is deploying it systematically in the 21st century, while the West is still figuring out how to think about social media. The bottom line: the ancient Chinese secrets of statecraft aren't really secrets. The texts are available. The principles are documented. Western scholars study them. The secret is that Chinese leaders actually believe them, actually train in them, and actually apply them systematically. While Western politicians quote Sun Tzu at business conferences, Chinese officials are executing Sun Tzu's strategies in Belt and Road, South China Sea expansion, and technology competition. While Western political scientists debate democratic peace theory, Chinese strategists are applying legalist control systems refined over 2,000 years. While Western diplomats try to build rules-based international order, Chinese officials are using the 36 stratagems to manipulate those rules to Chinese advantage. This isn't unfair. The texts are public. Anyone can learn them. But learning isn't the same as believing. And believing isn't the same as systematically applying in institutional practice. China has the advantage of civilizational continuity. The same strategic principles that guided the Han Dynasty still guide the People's Republic. Dynasties rose and fell, but the core insights about power and strategy persisted. The West breaks with its past every few generations. Revolutionary changes in political philosophy, new theories of international relations, constant innovation in strategic thinking. Sometimes innovation produces advantages, but sometimes continuity does. And when you're competing against principles refined over 2,000 years, revolution might not be better than evolution. The ancient Chinese secrets of statecraft are still used today because they work. They worked when China was the dominant civilization. They work now as China reclaims that status. And they'll keep working until someone develops countermeasures as sophisticated as the original techniques. The question isn't whether the West can learn these secrets. The texts are available. The question is whether Western institutions can systematically apply strategic principles across decades and centuries, consistently enough to compete with a civilization that's been doing exactly that for 2,000 years. Based on current evidence, the answer is no. And that's the real secret, not the techniques, the consistency of application across time. Click on the video on your screen now to keep watching. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and see you in the next one.